Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto summoned Rias and Nami for mating with her? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Echo of a Desperate Wish. He air in Konohagakure no Sato had grown thin. It was a strange, insidious affliction, a weariness that settled deep in the bones of the village. It wasn't the exhaustion of rebuilding that had followed the Fourth Great Ninja War, nor the grief that still echoed in quiet moments. This was something new, a silent thief. It started in the forests. The great, ancient trees of the Nara clan's preserve, which had stood for centuries as stoic guardians, were the first to show the signs. Their leaves, once a vibrant, chakra-rich green, turned a brittle, lifeless gray. The change was slow at first, a creeping discoloration at the edges. But it spread with an unnatural speed. The land itself seemed to be sighing, giving up its energy to some unseen parasite. Then it touched the people. Shinobi on our outing patrols would return utterly spent, their chakra reserves depleted far beyond what their exertions should have warranted. Medics reported patients whose recovery stalled, their bodies unable to muster the vital energy needed to heal. It was a blight, a spiritual sickness that no medical ninjutsu could diagnose and no sealing jutsu could contain. From his office, the seventh Hokage, Naruto Uzumaki, watched the twilight bleed across the sky, painting the undersides of the clouds in shades of bruised orange and purple. The iconic stone faces of his predecessors carved into the mountain behind him felt less like a comfort and more like a silent council of judges. He had saved the world from gods and monsters, from the near-infinite Tsukuyomi and the progenitor of all chakra, Kagaya Otsutsuki. He had brought peace. And yet, he was failing to stop this nothingness. This slow, quiet decay. He scrubbed a hand over his face, the rough calluses of his palm scraping against the weary stubble on his jaw. The paperwork on his desk was a mountain of grim reports. Crop failures in the farming districts. A drop in the birth rate. A patrol of Jonin, including some of his own generation, Ren. Dead unconscious for 3 days after a simple scouting mission near the border. The door opened without a knock. Shikamaru Nara entered, his usual languid slouch pulled taut with a tension that had become his new normal. Behind him, a silver-haired specter of a man, Kakashi Hatake, followed, his one visible eye carrying the weight of his experience. Another dead end, Shikamaru said, his voice flat. He tossed a scroll onto Naruto's desk, the unrolled parchment detailing a complex, layered barrier array they had erected around a particularly affected area. The seals held for exactly 47 minutes. Then they just faded. The chakra was leached right out of the ink. It's a drag. This thing doesn't break barriers, it eats them. Naruto leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his fingers steepled in front of his lips. And the analysis from the sensor division. Kakashi spoke, his tone quiet but sharp as a kunai. It's not an entity, Naruto. There's no chakra signature to track. It's the absence of one. Whatever this is, it operates on a principle we don't understand. It's like trying to punch a hole in the water. It just isn't there. We're treating a symptom, not the cause, Naruto murmured, his gaze distant. Kagaya tore a hole in things that weren't meant to be torn. We patched it up, but maybe something is still bleeding through the scar. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floorboards, and walked to the window. The village lights were beginning to flicker on, a constellation of warmth and life against the encroaching dusk. A village he was supposed to protect. What's the next move? Shikamaru asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer was, we don't have one. This is beyond the scope of any known jutsu. It's a logistical nightmare. Naruto's blue eyes, usually so full of life and defiant energy, were clouded with a storm of frustration and fear. He had poured his own immense reserves into the land, trying to revitalize it, but it was like pouring water into sand. The Sage of Six Paths had given him the power to create, to heal, to understand the fundamental nature of all things. But how could he fight a shadow that wasn't cast by anything? There might be one last thing, Naruto said, his voice barely a whisper. He turned from the window, his expression set with a grim resolve that made both Shikamaru and Kakashi straighten up. Something from my clan's archives. A contingency. Jiraiya sensei mentioned it once, called it the Uzumaki's last, desperate prayer. Kakashi's visible eye narrowed. Forbidden techniques are forbidden for a reason, Naruto. We don't know the cost. What's the cost of doing nothing? Naruto countered, his voice ringing with the authority of the Hokage. Watching our world wither and die. I've exhausted every other option. Every seal, every sage art, every jutsu in our arsenal. We're out of moves, Kakashi. He didn't wait for their arguments. He was already moving, a blur of orange and black exiting the office. They knew better than to follow. When Naruto Uzumaki moved with that kind of certainty, not even a mountain could stand in his way. The Uzumaki clan's archives were not in the Grand Konoha Library. They were hidden deep beneath the rubble of the Uzushiogakure shrine that had been relocated to a secluded corner of the village after the clan's fall. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, sealing ink, and the faint, briny tang of a long-lost home. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the glowing orb Naruto held in his palm. He ran his fingers over the spines of ancient, leather-bound scrolls. Most contained sealing techniques of terrifying power and complexity, the knowledge that had made his clan both feared and respected. But he wasn't looking for a seal. He was looking for a key. He found it in a simple, unadorned iron chest, bound not by a lock but by a blood seal that pulsed with a faint red light. He pressed his thumb to it. The seal flared, recognizing its master's blood, and the chest sprang open with a pneumatic hiss. Inside lay a single, massive scroll. The parchment was a deep, blood red, and the handles were carved from some kind of black, petrified wood. There was no title, only a single, stark warning brushed in archaic script. To call upon the echo is to risk the shattering of the self. For what is a prayer but an admission of failure? He unrolled it on the stone floor. The jutsu formula was unlike any he had ever seen. It was a maelstrom of intersecting circles, trigrams, and celestial maps, interwoven with script that seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of his vision. It didn't call for hand signs in the traditional sense. It called for a sacrifice of pure, raw life force. It was a summoning, but not for a creature or a spirit. The text spoke of pulling forth soul kin from realms of alternate truth, beings whose very existence resonated on a similar frequency to the summoner, yet were forged by different laws of reality. It was a ritual designed to find an answer to a question the summoner's own world could not provide. The cost was explicit. It could fail, consuming the summoner's life force for nothing. It could succeed, but the being summoned would be unpredictable, powerful, and unbound by any law he knew. Or it could shatter the veil between worlds, creating a wound far worse than the one he was trying to heal. Naruto stared at the scroll, the words a siren song to his desperation. He thought of his friends, his family, the children playing in the streets who didn't yet understand the creeping cold. His choice was already made. The Valley of the End was a place of dramatic, violent history. The colossal statues of Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha stood as eternal witnesses to the battles that had defined an era. It was a place saturated with power, a nexus of natural energy, and the perfect, isolated stage for what he was about to attempt. Naruto stood on the water's surface in the center of the lake. The waterfall crashing down behind him like applause for a tragedy yet to unfold. He had entered sage mode, the orange pigmentation around his eyes a stark contrast to the grim set of his jaw. He needed all the natural energy he could gather. He laid the scroll on the water, and it floated, the ink glowing with an ominous crimson light. Taking a deep breath, he placed his hands on its surface. He didn't weave signs, he simply pushed. He pushed his chakra into the formula. The world went silent. The roar of the waterfall, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of the wind, all of it vanished. Swallowed by an oppressive pressure. The lake beneath him began to boil, not from heat, but from the raw, untamed energy pouring from him. The crimson ink of the scroll lifted from the parchment, forming a three-dimensional, rotating sphere of characters in the air. He felt Kurama stir within him. Naruto, what is this? This is not a jutsu. It feels wrong. It's all we have left, Naruto sent back. His teeth gritted as sweat beaded on his forehead. He pushed harder. He dredged up the vast reserves gifted to him by the Sage of Six Paths, the bottomless well of his own life force. The air began to crackle. The sky above, a clear, star-dusted canvas moments before, was now a swirling vortex of angry purple and black clouds. A storm with no thunder, a tempest of pure energy. The sphere of characters exploded outward, and for a heart-stopping moment, Naruto felt his very essence being torn from his body. It was a hook, baited with his soul, cast into an ocean he couldn't see. Then, there was a bite, a tearing. The space in front of him ripped open. It wasn't a clean cut, but a jagged, violent wound in the fabric of reality, bleeding a light that was not starlight or sunlight. It was a chaotic, strobing mess of colors that defied description. From this wound, two figures were ejected with brutal force. The first was a cascade of crimson. A young woman with hair the color of fresh blood, impossibly long and rich, tumbled through the air. She was dressed in what looked like a school uniform, though it was now torn and singed. Her eyes, a striking blue-green, snapped open, filled with rage and disorientation. A wave of oppressive, arrogant power, nothing like chakra, rolled off her in suffocating waves. She landed with impossible grace, her body wreathed in a faint, destructive red aura. The second figure was thrown out like a ragdoll from a hurricane. A woman with vibrant orange hair, clad in little more than a bikini top and jeans, hit the water with a splash. She came up sputtering, a strange, three-section staff clutched in her hand. Her eyes, a sharp, intelligent brown, darted around, instantly assessing, cataloging, and calculating. They were the eyes of a survivor, a strategist who had been in impossible situations before. For a moment, there was only the sound of the waterfall and their ragged breaths. Then, the crimson-haired woman, Rias nami, spoke. Her voice laced with the cold fury of violated royalty. "Who dares?" she snarled, her gaze locking onto Naruto. Her aura flared. "Who are you that has the audacity to pull me, Rias nami, from my home?" Before Naruto, drained and staggering on the water's surface, could answer, the orange-haired woman, Nami, created her own response. She snapped her staff apart and back together. A small, dark cloud formed instantly above Rias's head. "You might want to worry about him later," Nami said, her voice tight with tension. "Right now, you're the bigger threat." A bolt of lightning, small but viciously precise, lanced down from the cloud. Rias threw up a hand, and a shield of crimson energy deflected the bolt, sending it sizzling into the lake. "An insolent human," Rias hissed, her attention now split. "You will learn your place." She lunged, not at Naruto, but at Nami, her hand glowing with the terrifying energy of destruction. Naruto's instincts screamed. He flickered between them, his hand catching Rias's wrist. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, a strange resonance of his chakra and her demonic power. "Stop," he commanded, his voice hoarse. "I don't know who you are, but I'm not your enemy." It was the wrong thing to say. To Rias, it sounded like a weak plea. To Nami, it sounded like a lie. And to the land, their violent, clashing energy were like blood in the water for a shark. The ground beneath the lake began to tremble. The gray, lifeless trees on the shore crumbled into dust. The very rock of the valley walls seemed to groan, and from it, the blight began to coalesce. It rose from the dead earth and drained water, a writhing mass of silent, sucking mist, dead wood, and crumbling stone. It had no face, no eyes, but it had a presence, a terrifying, all-consuming hunger. It took the form of a towering, vaguely humanoid monstrosity, a blight walker, and it dwarfed even the statues of the valley's founders. The three of them froze, their personal conflict instantly forgotten, dwarfed by the sheer wrongness of the creature before them. Rias stared, her aristocratic composure finally cracking. What is that thing?" Nami, her face pale, took a step back on the water, her clima-tact held in a white-knuckled grip. "It feels cold. It's pulling the heat right out of the air." Naruto didn't need to feel the cold. He felt the life force being siphoned from the valley, the sudden, horrifying acceleration of the decay. He had called for a cure, and instead, he had summoned a feast for the disease. He grit his teeth, forcing his exhausted limbs to obey. A Rasenshuriken, crackling and screaming like a miniature typhoon, formed in his hand. "We can figure out the introductions later," he yelled, his voice raw. "If we don't kill that thing, it's going to kill this whole planet." He charged. Without a shared word, driven by pure survival instinct, the others followed. Rias's hands glowed with the power of destruction, her face a mask of furious concentration. Nami began to spin her staff, manipulating the moisture-heavy air around the waterfall, her mind racing, calculating angles and weaknesses. They were not allies. They were strangers, enemies moments before, but under the suffocating shadow of the Blight Walker, they were, for now, a single, desperate, chaotic force against the encroaching silence. The battle for a world they didn't know had begun. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A Fragile Alliance. The Blight Walker collapsed not with a roar, but with a sigh. It was a sound of immense, final release, like a punctured lung the size of a mountain. The writhing mass of stone, dead wood, and shadow disintegrated, crumbling into a vast cloud of sterile gray dust that settled over the churning waters of the lake. The oppressive silence it had radiated shattered, and the roar of the waterfall rushed back in to fill the void, a deafening return to normalcy. For a long moment, the only movement was the heaving of 3 chests. Naruto was on one knee on the water's surface, his body trembling with the aftershocks of pouring the last dregs of his chakra into a final, colossal recentrican. The sage mode markings had faded from his eyes, leaving them a weary, human blue. The battle had been a blur of desperate, uncoordinated power. He'd thrown his attacks while the crimson-haired woman, Rias, unleashed waves of what felt like pure entropy, erasing chunks of the monster from existence. The orange-haired navigator, Nami, had been a whirlwind of tactical genius, using the mist from the waterfall to create mirages. Flash freezing sections of the creature's body with localized blizzards, and calling down lightning strikes that, while not powerful enough to kill it, were precise enough to stun it at critical moments. It was the messiest, most chaotic fight he'd ever been in. And it had worked. Slowly, he pushed himself to his feet. He looked at the 2 women. Rias stood with an air of strained regal dignity, though her fine clothes were shredded and a thin trickle of blood ran from her temple. Her breathing was deep and controlled, but her eyes, when they met his, held a flicker of grudging respect mixed with deep suspicion. Nami was leaning heavily on her strange staff, her face pale under its tan, her sharp eyes darting between him and Rias, constantly re-evaluating the threat level. "Okay," Naruto said, his voice raspy. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Okay, let's try this again. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I'm the Hokage of this village. I'm sorry for pulling you here. I was trying to save my world." Rias arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "By kidnapping a high-ranking devil and her." She gestured dismissively toward Nami. "A rather presumptuous method of seeking aid." "Hey," Nami shot back, her weariness momentarily forgotten in a flare of indignation. "This, her, just saved you from getting flattened by a rock monster, so you can put a lid on the attitude. And for the record, I'm Nami, navigator of the Straw Hat Pirates. And I want to know exactly where here is, and how you're going to get me back to my crew." Before the argument could escalate, 4F. Figures flickered into existence on the shore. Kakashi and Shikamaru, their faces grim masks of concern, flanked by 2 elite Anbu, their animal masks hiding all expression. They took in the scene, the destroyed valley. The 3 figures standing on the water, the lingering scent of ozone and something else, something alien and unsettling. "Naruto," Kakashi called out, his voice sharp with command. "Are you all right? What happened?" "It's complicated," Naruto called back, rubbing the back of his neck. It felt like the understatement of the century. The Hokage's office was suffocatingly quiet. The tension was a physical presence, thicker than the steam rising from the 3 cups of tea Sakura had brought in and then wisely left. Naruto sat behind his desk, feeling less like a leader and more like a child who had broken a priceless vase. Kakashi stood by the window, his arms crossed, his single eye unreadable. Shikamaru sat in a chair, his fingers steepled, his expression a familiar mixture of intellectual curiosity and profound exasperation. Rias and Nami stood in the center of the room, refusing the offered seats. They were an island of mutual, if temporary, solidarity in a sea of foreign shinobi. Rias examined the office with an air of detached disdain, as if evaluating a peasant's hovel. Nami's eyes, however, missed nothing: the maps on the wall, the worn spines of the books on the shelves, the way the Anbu guards were subtly positioned on the rooftops outside. She was gathering intelligence, mapping the escape routes before she even knew if she needed them. A devil, Shikamaru finally said, breaking the silence. He was looking at Rias. You mean, like, from the old myths? Horns, pitchfork, the whole deal. Rias favored him with a look of utter contempt. Do I look like I carry a farming implement? I am Rias Grimori, heiress to the House of Grimori, one of the 72 pillars of the underworld. And I demand to be returned at once. And you, Shikamaru continued, his gaze shifting to Nami, are a pirate. From another world, one with a vast sea, I'm guessing. This is going to be a real drag on our foreign policy. My world has problems you can't even imagine, Nami retorted. Her hand resting on the klima tact she refused to relinquish. But at least it makes sense. Here, you have people who can walk on water and spit fire, but you still use paper for your documents. What's the deal with that? Naruto sighed, leaning forward. Look, I know this is a lot to take in. My world is facing a threat that consumes life energy, chakra. I used a forbidden jutsu from my ancestors to call for help, to summon beings who could fight something that our laws of nature don't account for. I didn't know who it would bring. I didn't know it would bring two of you. Kakashi turned from the window. Naruto. The council is already in an uproar. The elders felt the surge of power. They know you used a forbidden technique. Bringing two unknown, and clearly powerful, individuals into the heart of the village without any quarantine or assessment, it's a security nightmare. They helped me defeat that thing in the valley, Naruto argued, his voice rising. That proves they aren't the enemy. It proves they're good at surviving, Kakashi countered calmly. Which makes them even more dangerous if their interests don't align with ours. Rias gave a short, sharp laugh. Our internal politics are of no concern to me. My only interest is in returning to my own affairs. If you cannot manage that, then you will find my displeasure to be a far greater threat than any blight. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with her demonic power, a silent, suffocating promise of destruction. Nami, however, was more practical. She looked at Naruto, her sharp gaze cutting through the posturing. Let's cut the crap. You broke your world, and you dragged us into it to fix it. Fine, I've been in worse spots. But what's in it for us? I need to get back to my captain. My friends, can you do that? If you can't, then everything else is just noise. Her directness seemed to catch everyone off guard. She wasn't making threats or demands of fealty. She was negotiating terms. As the most sensible thing anyone had said all evening. Naruto met her gaze. I don't know, he admitted, the honesty costing him. The scroll told me how to open the door, not how to choose who came through or how to send them back. But I swear on my name as Hokage, I will find a way. Until then, I'm asking for your help. My world is dying, and after seeing you both in action, I think you might be the only ones who can help me stop it. Quote, the plea, stripped of all bravado and authority, hung in the air. It was a genuine admission of vulnerability from the most powerful man in their world. It was Shikamaru who broke the stalemate. A slow, weary grin spreading across his face. What a drag, so we have a devil princess and a pirate navigator. This is the most troublesome alliance in history. It might just be crazy enough to work. Accommodations were arranged in a secure, private estate on the outskirts of the village, one usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. It was spacious and comfortable, but the invisible perimeter of Anbu guards was a constant reminder that they were guests and prisoners in equal measure. For the first time in hours, Naruto, Rias, and Nami were alone together. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a new, awkward reality. Rias was examining a hanging scroll with a critical eye, while Nami was sketching a rough map of the village she'd seen from the Hokage Tower on a napkin. This art is rather primitive, Rias commented, breaking the silence. All function, no form. Says the one wearing a tattered schoolgirl outfit. Nah. Mi shot back without looking up from her drawing. Rias's eye twitched. It is the uniform of Kuo Academy, a prestigious institution. And it is far more practical than that. She gestured vaguely at Nami's bikini top and jeans. It's good for swimming and doesn't restrict movement. It's practical for a life at sea. Nami finally looked up, her expression serious. So, a devil, like, deals for souls an eternal damnation. Rias sighed. A sound of long-suffering patience. It's far more complex than your human myths would suggest. We are a race, a society. We have a peerage system, territories, politics. Souls are a form of currency. Yes, but it's more akin to a contract than a simple purchase. She paused, looking at Naruto, who was quietly observing them. And what of you? This chakra, you wield it with the force of 1,000 armies, but you feel human. It's a contradiction. Naruto leaned against a pillar. Chakra is the energy that connects all living things in my world. It's a part of us. We mold it to perform jutsu. Some are born with more, some with less. I just happen to have a lot. He didn't feel the need to explain the nine-tailed fox sealed within him just yet. They had enough to process. They talked for hours. Driven by a mutual need for information, the initial hostility gave way to a guarded curiosity. Naruto learned of the great war between devils, angels, and fallen angels. Of the complex hierarchy of the underworld, and of Rias's own struggles against the expectations of her noble family. He and Rias then listened, fascinated, as Nami described the grand line. A sea of impossible weather and physics, of islands in the sky and underwater, of devil fruits that granted incredible powers at the cost of the ability to swim, and of her captain, a rubber boy with an insatiable appetite and a dream of becoming the pirate king. In their stories, they found a strange common ground. Each of them lived in a world of violent, superhuman conflict. Each of them fought for their family, be it a peerage, a pirate crew, or a village. And each of them carried a burden of leadership and responsibility that far exceeded their years. A flicker of understanding, he first fragile thread of a genuine connection, was woven in the quiet space between their worlds. The news of the summoning spread through the great shinobi nations like wildfire. Communication was faster in this new era of peace. But so was the spread of fear. Naruto's office was soon flooded with official inquiries, each more demanding than the last. The Tsuchikage expressed grave concern. The Mizukage requested immediate clarification. The message from Kumogakure, the village hidden in the clouds, was less diplomatic. It was a direct transmission from the Raikage, Darui. A single, oming sentence that needed no further explanation. Naruto, what in the hell have you done? Shikamaru managed the political fallout with his usual strategic genius, drafting carefully worded responses that said much and revealed little. But it was a stopgap measure. A summit was inevitable. The balance of power, so painstakingly built after the war, had been thrown into chaos. Naruto had acted unilaterally, and the other villages saw it as Konoha making a power play, acquiring two new, terrifyingly powerful weapons. The pressure was mounting, both from outside the village and from within. The Konoha Council, led by the elder Homura Mitokado, a relic of a more cautious and paranoid era, was demanding that the Outworlders be sealed away for study. They are too dangerous, too unknown to be allowed to roam free. Homura had argued in a tense council meeting. We don't know their motives, their limitations. What if their very presence is what's accelerating this blight? Naruto had shut down the argument, his voice echoing with the power of a cage who would not be questioned on a matter of core principle. They are not weapons, and they are not prisoners. They are allies, under my personal protection. But he knew the words were not enough. A demonstration was needed. A line had to be drawn. He just didn't realize it would be drawn in the middle of his own village. It happened at dusk, 3 days after their arrival. The trio were walking through a quiet training ground, a rare moment of peace. Naruto was explaining the basic principles of chakra control, something both Rias and Nami were struggling to grasp. Their own power systems were inherent, not molded. Suddenly, a dozen figures dropped from the trees, surrounding them. Anbu. But not his Anbu. Their masks were blank, featureless white. And their allegiance was clear from the cold, unwavering intent in their posture. They worked for the council's more conservative faction. They were Danzo's legacy, a root of Ranoia that had never been fully dug out. Rias Gramori. Nami, the leader said, his voice distorted by a seal on his mask. By order of the Konoha Council, you are to be taken into custody for assessment and containment. Rias scoffed, a flicker of crimson energy already dancing around her fingertips. And what if I refuse? Resistance is not advised, the Anbu leader stated flatly. Naruto stepped forward, his body moving to shield both of them. His easygoing demeanor vanished, replaced by an icy calm that was far more terrifying than any rage. "Stand down," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is your only warning. Our orders come from the council, Lord Hokage," the Anbu replied, though he couldn't hide a slight tremor in his voice. "They believe your judgment has been compromised." "My judgment is the law," Naruto snapped back, and then he moved. It wasn't a fight, it was a statement. He didn't use a Rasengan or a shadow clone. He moved with pure, unadulterated speed and precision, a blur of motion. He disarmed one Anbu, dismantled the sealing chains of another, and broke the formation in under 3 seconds. He wasn't trying to hurt them. He was simply proving that they were utterly, hopelessly outmatched. As the Anbu scrambled to regroup, Rias and Nami acted. Rias unleashed a single, controlled orb of destructive energy that impacted the ground in the center of the Anbu, vaporizing the earth and sending them flying. Nami swung her Kleem attack, creating a dense, disorienting fog filled with mirages of herself, turning their numerical advantage into a liability. The entire confrontation was over in less than a minute. The dozen elite Anbu lay groaning on the ground, their weapons scattered, their pride shattered. Naruto stood over their leader, his blue eyes blazing. "Go back to the elders," he commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Tell them this. These two are not Konoha's enemies. They are my guests. They are this world's hope. And anyone, from inside this village or out, who treats them as anything less, will have to go through me." He turned his back on them, a deliberate, powerful dismissal. He looked at Rias and Nami, who were watching him with wide, surprised eyes. In that moment, he wasn't just the kind, slightly goofy leader they had met. He was the Hokage, the hero of the Fourth Great War, a pillar of unshakable will. "I guess that settles that," Nami said, letting out a low whistle. Rias said nothing, but a slow, genuine smile touched her lips. This was a man who understood power. A king, in his own right. The lines had been drawn. The fragile alliance, born of desperation and forged in the heat of battle, had just been tempered in the fires of defiance. They were in this together now, a devil, a pirate, and a ninja. And the world would just have to learn to deal with it. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Whispers of the Silent King. The land of fire was a tapestry of vibrant greens and earthy browns, a stark and defiant contrast to the creeping gray that gnawed at its borders. For Rias and Nami, leaving the structured confines of Konoha was like stepping into a different world altogether. The sheer, untamed scale of it was breathtaking. Forests stretched to the horizon, ancient trees forming a dense canopy that sunlight struggled to pierce. Rivers carved paths through the landscape with the casual force of a god's fingertip. Nami was in her element, though her tools were useless. The magnetic fields were a chaotic mess, rendering her log pose a spinning, useless trinket. The weather patterns were unnaturally stable, a detail she found more disturbing than any storm. She stood on a high bluff, a breeze whipping her orange hair, her eyes scanning the terrain with a navigator's practiced gaze. Our pressure is dropping consistently as we move east, but there's no corresponding increase in humidity, she observed, more to herself than to the others. It's like the land is breathing in, but never breathing out. It's not a weather phenomenon. It's a vacuum. Rias, perched gracefully on a nearby rock, watched with a noble's detached air. This realm is so raw, unstructured. In the underworld, every mountain and river has a name, a history, a lord who governs it. This is just wild. Yet, there was an undeniable fascination in her voice. The sheer abundance of natural energy, even in its weakened state, was a stark contrast to the refined, but finite, demonic energy she was used to. Naruto, acting as their guide, felt the subtle wrongness of his world through their eyes. He'd lived with it for months, but their fresh perspectives made the decay feel more acute, more personal. He was tracking the blight not by sight, but by its absence. He could feel the thinning of the world's life force, a cold spot in the vast network of natural energy he was connected to through Sage Mode. "We're getting closer," he said, his voice grim. "The trail is stronger here. Whatever its source, it's like a poison being pumped into a river. We're heading upstream." They had been traveling for 2 days, a strange trio that drew more than a few stares from the small farming communities they passed. The hero of the world. A crimson-haired noblewoman who radiated an aura of dangerous power, and a fiery navigator who looked like she'd just stepped off a beach. They were a walking contradiction, a puzzle no one could solve. It was on the third day that they were intercepted. They were in a petrified forest, a place where the blight had already won. The trees were gray, silent statues, their nchs-like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. There was no wind, no birdsong, no sign of life. The silence was absolute. A figure stepped out from behind one of the stone-like trunks. He was a man of indeterminate age, with silver hair tied back in a simple knot and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wore simple, gray robes and carried no weapons. He exuded no chakra, no demonic energy, nothing that Naruto's senses could lock onto. He was just there. A blank spot in the world. Naruto, Rias, and Nami instantly fell into a defensive formation, their recent experiences having honed their reflexes into a single, cohesive unit. "Who are you?" Naruto demanded, his hand already beginning to form the familiar whirl of a Rasengan. The man didn't seem perturbed. He offered a slight, placid bow. "I am a warden of the Nexus Guard. I am here to observe and, if necessary, to correct." "Nexus Guard?" Nami questioned, her klima tact held at the ready. "Never heard of you. Are you with the world government?" The man's smile was thin and held no warmth. "Your world government is but one line in one chapter of one book in a library that stretches across infinity. We are the librarians." His gaze settled on Naruto. And for the first time, Naruto felt a chill that had nothing to do with the blight. It was the feeling of being seen, truly seen, by something ancient and impossibly vast. "Your summoning was a scream in the silent void." "Naruto Uzumaki," the warden said, his voice calm and even. "A beacon of desperate power. It was heard not only by us, but by the one you have drawn to this world. You call it the blight. It is merely the shadow of his approach. The one who comes is known by many names, but his truest is the Silent King." Rias stepped forward, her power flaring like a protective mantle. "If you know of this threat, why do you stand by and do nothing? It is your duty to intervene." "Duty?" The warden's winter sky eyes seemed to hold a flicker of pity. "Our duty is to the integrity of the whole, not the survival of the parts. Your worlds were never meant to intersect. This alliance you have forged, it is a beautiful, chaotic thing. A perversion of the natural order. And it sings a song of power that the Silent King finds irresistible. He does not just want to consume your world's energy, now he wants to possess the three of you who have dared to blend it." He took a single step forward, and the air warped around him. "I am here to offer you one warning. Disband this alliance. Sever the connection. Let the summoning fade. Your worlds may be able to resist him separately. Together, you are a feast he cannot ignore." Naruto's Rasengan dissipated. He stared at the warden, his mind reeling. "You want us to give up? To let my world die?" "A world is a transient thing," the warden replied, his voice devoid of malice, filled only with a terrible, absolute certainty. "The laws that bind all worlds are eternal. You are breaking those laws. I urge you to reconsider, before we are forced to correct your error." And then, as silently as he had appeared, he dissolved. He didn't teleport or flicker. He simply faded from view, like a thought forgotten, leaving the standing in the suffocating silence of the petrified forest. The warden's words hung over them like a shroud, poisoning the air between them. They pressed on, the grim purpose of their journey now heavier than ever. Their destination was a small, isolated village called Shijima, nestled in a valley that, according to Naruto's maps, should have been on the very edge of the blight's encroaching influence. When they crested the final ridge and looked down, they saw that the maps were wrong. The village was entirely engulfed. The houses were gray, the fields were gray, the river that ran through it was a sluggish, slate-colored ribbon. Yet, there were people. They moved through the streets with a slow, serene grace, their faces placid and emotionless. There was no panic, no despair. There was nothing. Naruto, Rias, and Nami entered the village, their vibrant colors and energetic presence a jarring intrusion into the monochrome piece. The villagers turned to look at them, their eyes vacant, their expressions unchanging. They weren't hostile. They were simply incurious. A man, older than the rest, with a long white beard and flowing gray robes, approached them. He held a staff carved from a petrified tree. And unlike the others, his eyes held a spark of knowing intelligence. "Welcome, travelers," he said, his voice a soft, soothing whisper. "You have come seeking an end to your struggle. You have come to the right place. Here, we have found peace." "Peace," Nami scoffed, gesturing to the dead fields around them. "This looks like a graveyard. Your people are being drained of their life force." The man smiled, a gentle, beatific expression. "We are not being drained, child. We are giving. We offer up the chaotic energies of emotion, ambition, and pain. In return, we are granted silence. An end to the struggle. The great silence is a gift, a purification." Naruto stared at the man, horrified. "You're killing yourselves. Life is the struggle. It's the joy and the pain, the connections we make. And what has that struggle brought your world, 7th Hokage?" The priest countered, his soft voice cutting deeper than any blade. "Endless war, loss, grief, a cycle of hatter. That you yourself have fought your entire life to break. We have not broken the cycle. We have simply stepped off the wheel." It was then that the trio's own philosophies, their own inner struggles, erupted to the surface. Rias looked at the placid villagers with undisguised disgust. "This is pathetic," she hissed, her voice low so only Naruto and Nami could hear. "They've given up. Desire, ambition, that is what drives us. What makes us strong. This isn't peace, it's a living death. We should destroy this priest, and shatter this illusion. Force them to wake up. Force them." Nami shot back, her eyes flashing with anger. "We can't just impose our will on them. That's what villains do. We have to show them they're being tricked, that this gift is really a poison. They have to choose to be free. Choice is a luxury for the strong." Rias retorted, her demonic energy beginning to leak out, a manifestation of her frustration. "These people are weak. They've made a weak choice. It is the duty of the powerful to correct them, to guide them back to the path of strength. That's the kind of thinking that got Arlong to enslave my village." Nami's voice rose, laced with the pain of old wounds. "He thought he was strong. And that gave him the right to rule, to take away our choices. I will not be a part of that, ever." Naruto stood between them, a torrent of conflicting emotions warring within him. He felt Rias's burning impatience, her desire to solve the problem with decisive, overwhelming force. He felt Nami's passionate defense of free will, her belief that a forced salvation was no salvation at all. He agreed with them both, and it was tearing him apart. "Stop it," he finally yelled, his voice cracking like a whip. "Fighting each other is what he wants." He pointed a trembling finger at the priest, who was watching their argument with that same serene, knowing smile. The priest, a herald of the silent king, took that as his cue. "You see," he whispered, his voice seeming to echo in their minds. "The struggle is your poison. The devil princess, burdened by the weight of her name, desperate to prove her strength. The pirate navigator, haunted by a past of powerlessness, clinging to a flawed concept of freedom. The Hokage, a vessel of infinite power and infinite loneliness, terrified of failing the world he has sworn to protect." The world around them seemed to fade, the gray village replaced by illusions tailored to their deepest fears. Rias saw her family, her peerage, turning their backs on her, calling her a failure for being trapped in a lesser world. Nami saw the thousand sunnies sailing away, her crew forgetting she ever existed, her place at the helm taken by another. Naruto saw the faces of everyone he had ever lost, Jiraiya, his parents, Neji, Th. Ire expressions filled with disappointment. "Lay down your burdens," the herald's voice soothed. "Let go of the pain. Join us in the beautiful, peaceful silence." The herald didn't need to throw a punch. His weapon was despair, and it was brutally effective. Nami sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Rias's proud posture crumbled, her hands clenched into fists as she fought the visions in her mind. Naruto felt the cold, familiar tendrils of loneliness wrapping around his heart, whispering that in the end, he was always alone. But the herald had made one critical mistake. He had isolated them, and in doing so, he reminded them of what they had just found, each other. Naruto grit his teeth, the illusion of his past failures shattering against a new, unshakable reality. He wasn't alone anymore. He looked at Rias, at Nami, their faces twisted in pain, and a protective fury he hadn't felt since the war surged through him. He was a vessel, yes, but not just of power. He was a vessel of connection. "You're wrong," Naruto said, his voice quiet but clear. He entered Sage mode, the orange markings snapping into place around his eyes, the vibrant energy of the world, what little was left of it, flooding into him. "Our pain, our struggles, they don't just weaken us. They're how we connect. They're what make us who we are." He reached out, placing a hand on Nami's shoulder and Rias's arm. His chakra, warm and full of life, flowed into them, a shield against the Herald's psychic assault. The illusions flickered and died. Nami looked up, her tear-filled eyes clearing with a renewed fire. Rias straightened her back, her crimson energy surging, no longer chaotic, but focused into a fine, sharp point. They had almost succumbed to their own divisions, but Naruto's unshakable faith had become their anchor. "He's using the villagers," Nami said, her strategist's mind kicking back into gear. "He's channeling their surrendered energy. We don't have to fight him, we have to cut off his power source." Rias nodded, her gaze locked on the Herald. "I will give you a distraction." She moved, a blur of crimson and black, her target not the Herald, but the petrified staff he held. She didn't attack him directly but unleashed a torrent of destructive power that forced him onto the defensive, his attention completely focused on her. While the Herald was occupied, Nami swung her Kleem attack. She didn't create a storm cloud. She created a perfect, shimmering sphere of dense, heated air right in the center of the village plaza, a weather egg that grew rapidly. "Naruto," she yelled, "your wind style. Disperse it." Naruto understood instantly. He inhaled deeply and unleashed a gale palm, not as an attack, but as a controlled, massive gust of wind that struck Nami's weather egg. The sphere exploded, releasing a wave of warm, humid air that was saturated with a fine, electrically charged mist. It wasn't an attack on the people, but it was a shock to their system. The sudden change in atmosphere, the feeling of moisture on their skin for the first time in ages, the tingle of static electricity, it was enough to break their placid trance. A flicker of confusion, of awareness, appeared on their faces. The Herald staggered back, a strangled cry escaping his lips as his power source flickered. The flow of energy from the villagers was no longer steady. It was chaotic, sputtering. And in that moment of weakness, Naruto struck. He appeared before the Herald, a sage art, massive Rasengan in his palm. It wasn't an attack born of anger, but of defiance. It was a spinning vortex of life, of emotion, of struggle. Of everything the Silent King stood to annihilate. "Life is not silent," Naruto roared, and slammed the attack home. The Herald of the Silent King dissolved into gray dust, his final expression not one of pain, but of shocked disbelief. They stood in the aftermath, breathing heavily. The villagers were stirring, looking around as if waking from a long dream. Their faces filled with a dawning horror at what they had become. The victory was absolute, but it felt hollow. They hadn't just defeated a monster. They had seen the insidious appeal of their enemy's promise. And they knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the first whisper of a god who promised peace at the cost of everything that it meant to be alive. Their argument forgotten, the trio stood united by a shared, grim understanding. The war had just begun. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Pact of the Crimson Maelstrom. The journey back to Konoha was a heavy, silent affair. The memory of the village of Shijima, the placid faces, the gentle priest who spoke of peace while peddling annihilation, was a colder, more intimate threat than the mindless Blight Walker. That, they could fight. This, they had to understand. The whispers of the Silent King were not a battle cry, but a seductive lullaby, and it had nearly sung them all to sleep. Back in the Hokage's office, the weight of their discovery settled upon them. Shikamaru listened to their report, his usual bored expression replaced by one of sharp, focused intensity. Kakashi stood by the map of the Land of Fire, his single eye tracing the path of the Blight's corruption, his mind clearly calculating the horrifying speed of its spread. "An ideological enemy," Shikamaru murmured, leaning back in his chair, his hands laced behind his head. "This is the most troublesome kind. You can't punch an idea. They're not just draining energy, they're converting people. It's not a plague, it's a religion." Naruto slammed a fist on his desk, the wood groaning in protest. "There has to be more. That warden from the Nexus Guard, he said we were making things worse just by being together. But when we fought that herald, we were stronger together. It doesn't make sense. His gaze drifted to a secure shelf where he had stored the Uzumaki clan's summoning scroll. It felt like it was humming with an unanswered question. Maybe we're not reading the whole message, he said, standing and walking to the shelf. He lifted the heavy, blood-red scroll and unrolled it across his desk, its ancient parchment covering maps and reports. The complex, swirling formula that had torn a hole in reality stared up at them. I used it to summon help, Naruto said, tracing the central spiral with his finger. But what if that was just opening the door? Look at this. He pointed to a series of smaller, almost imperceptible characters embedded within the main formula, characters that only became visible when a user's own chakra was channeled into the scroll. As he pushed a small amount of his energy into the parchment, the script glowed with a soft, golden light. Kakashi leaned in closer, his eye narrowing. This is an older dialect of the Uzumaki clan's script. More fundamental. It's not just a jutsu formula. It's a treatise, a theory. For hours, they worked. Naruto provided the chakra to illuminate the hidden text, Kakashi provided the archaic linguistic knowledge to translate it, and Shikamaru provided the strategic mind to piece together the concepts. Rias and Nami watched, a strange mixture of impatience and fascination, as the three men deciphered the last desperate gambit of Naruto's ancestors. The picture that emerged was terrifying and awe-inspiring. The summoning was indeed only the first step. The scroll spoke of threats it called world enders. Beings are forces so antithetical to the concept of life that no single reality could muster the power to stop them. The Uzumaki, masters of connection and life force, had theorized a solution, the Pact of the Triune Soul. It was not a contract. It was a fusion, a permanent, symbiotic weaving of the life threads of the summoner and the summoned. It would allow them to share not just power, but senses, emotions, and life force. Naruto's chakra, Rias's demonic energy, and whatever fundamental force Nami's strange abilities drew upon would cease to be separate pools of power. They would become a single, braided river, creating a hybrid energy that the scroll claimed could unmake the unmade and give silence a voice. The ritual was described in arcane, metaphorical terms, the joining of breaths, the sharing of the soul's heart, the union of kindred spirits. It was deeply, fundamentally intimate, a connection that would make them more than allies, more than friends. They would be, for all intents and purposes, a part of each other. The final lines of the scroll were a stark warning. To weave the threads is to create a new pattern. The old selves will not survive the union. For a cord of 3 strands is not 3 strings, but a new rope altogether. The bond, once forged, can never be undone. Silence fell over the office as Shikamaru finished his explanation. The implications were staggering. Naruto rolled up the scroll, his movements slow and deliberate. He felt the weight of the choice before them, and he knew it was not his to make alone. He turned to Rias and Nami, his expression stripped of all authority, leaving only the raw vulnerability of a man asking for the impossible. "So, that's it," he said, his voice quiet. "The scroll's answer. It's not just about getting help. It's about becoming something new. Something strong enough to fight a god." He met their eyes, one after the other. "I will not ask this of you. It's too much. To be permanently bound to me. To this world. To have your very essence changed. I brought you here, and it's my responsibility to find a way to send you home. We can keep fighting as we are, and I will pour everything I have into finding that way." He took a deep breath. "But the scroll says this is the only way to truly win. The choice is yours, and whatever you decide, I will honor it." Nami was the first to speak, her voice tight. "So I'd be stuck here forever." The thought of never seeing Luffy, Sanji, or the others again was a physical blow. Her loyalty to her crew was the compass of her entire life. "Even if we win, I'd lose them." Rias was just as unsettled, though for different reasons. "To merge my power, the pride of the House of Grimori, with that of a human and another human. The ingrained aristocracy of her upbringing warred with the undeniable respect she had developed for them. I would cease to be purely Rias Grimori. A part of me would be forever tied to this realm. It is a loss of self I cannot comprehend." The air was thick with the weight of their potential futures, branching into impossible, painful paths. Before anyone could say another word, reality buckled. A sound like tearing silk filled the room, and the space in the center of the office twisted. A vortex of obsidian and amethyst energies spun into existence, a jagged wound in the air far more precise and controlled than the one Naruto's ritual had created. From it stepped a man. He was tall and impossibly handsome, with long, silver hair and eyes the color of molten gold. He wore the opulent, tailored finery of a high-ranking devil, and a smirk of arrogant amusement played on his lips. An immense, suffocating pressure of demonic energy, different from Rias's but just as potent, filled the room. Rias's blood ran cold. "Valerius," she breathed, her voice a mixture of shock and fury. Lady Grimori, the man, Lord Valerius Bale, heard, his golden eyes sweeping over the room with dismissive contempt. "I must apologize for the crude entrance. My spatial magic is still adjusting to the quaint physics of this backwater dimension." His gaze fell on Naruto and Nami. "I see you've acquired some local pets. How charming. What are you doing here, Valerius?" Rias demanded, stepping forward, her own crimson aura flaring to life. "Your sudden, unexplained absence created quite the stir in the underworld," Valerius said, examining his fingernails with feigned indifference. "Some feared you were captured. Others hoped. I, being an opportunist, simply followed the lingering scent of your power. And now I've found you. Defenseless, without your peerage, in a world made of dirt and sticks." He smiled, a flash of predatory hunger in his eyes. "I'm here to offer you my protection. Marry into my house, merge our powers under the banner of Baal, and I will graciously overlook this embarrassing little excursion." Naruto stepped up beside Rias. "She didn't ask for your protection. And she's not defenseless." Valerius's golden eyes finally focused on Naruto, a flicker of genuine curiosity in them. "Ah, the summoner. You have a rather large energy signature for a mortal. It will make a fine trophy." He lunged, but he didn't cross the space between them. He simply vanished and reappeared directly behind Rias, his hand reaching for her neck. Before he could make contact, a wall of 9 tails chakra, blazing and ferocious, erupted from Naruto, shoving him back. The fight exploded out of the office and into the skies above Konoha. Valerius was unlike any opponent they had ever faced. He didn't just move fast. He bent space to his will. He would attack from the left and his fist would emerge from a portal on the right. He'd teleport above them, launching spears of demonic energy, only to vanish before any counterattack could land. Naruto, in his Kurama chakra mode, was a blur of golden energy, his raw speed and power the only thing keeping Valerius from ending the fight instantly. Rias unleashed torrents of her power of destruction, but Valerius would simply open a portal, redirecting her own attacks back at her. They were fighting a ghost, a foe who was everywhere and nowhere at once. Nami watched from the rooftop of the Hokage Tower, her knuckles white on her klima tacked. She felt a familiar, sickening pang of helplessness. She couldn't trade blows with these monsters. She couldn't create a blast of energy that could level a mountain. She was, as Valerius had said, a pet. Useless. No, the thought was a spark of defiance. She remembered Arlong. She remembered Enel. She had faced gods before. And she had never won with brute force. She had won with her mind. She stopped watching the fighters and started watching the fight itself. The air, the light, heat particles of dust kicked up by their battle. Valerius was fast, but he wasn't magic. His teleportation had to have a tell. And she saw it. A faint, almost invisible shimmer in the air, like heat haze, just before a portal opened. A subtle drop in humidity as he warped the space. He wasn't creating something from nothing, he was folding the existing world. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of meteorological data and tactical possibilities. An idea, crazy and dangerous, sparked in her mind. "Rias," she yelled, her voice cutting through the din of battle. "Keep him busy. Naruto, I need a distraction. A big one." Naruto didn't question her. He formed a dozen shadow clones, each one creating a Rasengan, and sent them swarming at Valerius from all directions. It was a chaotic, overwhelming assault that forced the devil to teleport rapidly, weaving a complex web of spatial distortions to evade them all. It was the opening Nami needed. She pointed her klima tacked at the sky. Thunder trap. She didn't create a storm. She manipulated the atmosphere itself, creating a massive, invisible field of positive and negative static charges in the very air Valerius was warping through. She couldn't see where he was, but she could saturate the entire battlefield with the potential for lightning. Then, she used her most subtle technique, Mirage Tempo. Dozens of shimmering, illusory copies of herself, Naruto, and Rias flooded the sky. Valerius, momentarily distracted by the Rasengan barrage, found himself in a confusing hall of mirrors. Insolent gnat, he roared, blasting a wave of energy that dispersed the clones and mirages. He reappeared behind the real Nami, his hand outstretched, a smirk on his face. Your parlor tricks are amusing, but this is where they end. You're right, Nami said, not even turning around. A grim smile on her own face. They end right here. As his hand entered the space where her back should have been, he passed through the invisible, supercharged field she had created. Nami snapped her fingers. The static charge found its ground. The massive, conductive demonic energy of a high-class devil. An explosion of lightning, not from the sky, but from the very air around him, engulfed Valerius. He screamed, a sound of pure shock and agony, his body convulsing as a billion volts of raw electricity coursed through him, short-circuiting his demonic power and, more importantly, shattering his concentration. His control over space collapsed. He fell from the sky, smoking and twitching. Before he could hit the ground, Naruto was there, pinning him with chakra arms forged from the sage's power. Rias descended slowly, her face a mask of cold fury. She stood over her defeated rival, the full, terrifying might of the House of Grimoire radiating from her. You came to my new home, she said, her voice dangerously soft. You insulted my new allies. And you threatened my new life. Let this be a lesson, Valerius. I am not defenseless. And I am not alone. She raised her hand, a sphere of pure destructive energy swirling in her palm. With a final look of contempt, she unleashed it not on Valerius, but on the unstable portal he had left open. The portal imploded, violently sucking the defeated devil back into his own dimension with a final, pathetic shriek. Victory. Hard won. A true team effort. They landed on the rooftop, breathing heavily. The adrenaline began to fade. Naruto looked at Nami, his eyes wide with awe. That was incredible. How did you even think of that? Nami shrugged, a genuine, confident smile spreading across her face. He may be a devil, but he still has to obey the laws of physics. More or less, she had proven herself, not just to them, but to herself. She wasn't a pet. She was a pirate. She was a strategist. She was a monster in her own right. Rias walked over to them. The battle had burned away her uncertainty. Valerius's words, meant to belittle, had instead clarified everything. He called this a backwater, but he had found allies who fought for her without demand or contract. She had found a power in unity she had never known in the rigid hierarchy of the underworld. This wasn't a loss of self. It was an expansion of it. She looked from Nami's brilliant, triumphant face to Naruto's steady, reassuring one. Her decision was made. I'll do it, she said, her voice clear and strong. I will accept the pact. Nami's smile softened. Her own choice was just as clear. The path back to her crew was unknown, maybe impossible. But the path forward, the one that stopped a god from erasing everything and gave this world a fighting chance, was right here, with these people, her new crew. For now, she had a place here. A purpose. Me too, she said, her voice firm. Let's show this silent king what a real storm looks like. Naruto looked at them, a slow grin spreading across his face, chasing away the last of the shadows. The fear was still there, the uncertainty of the ritual that lay ahead. But for the first time, it was overshadowed by a powerful, unshakable hope. He led them back to his office, where the blood-red scroll lay waiting. Together, they unrolled it. The ancient characters glowed, not with a sense of dread, but with the promise of a new beginning. They were ready. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Bonds forged in soulfire. The Uzumaki Shrine was a pocket of stillness in a world on the verge of collapse. The air within was thick with the scent of aged cedar, sealing ink, and the faint, lingering echo of 1,000 whispered prayers. Flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, which were adorned with the spiraling crest of a lost clan. It was a place of deep, foundational power, a fitting stage for the irreversible choice they were about to make. The blood-red scroll lay unrolled on the polished stone floor, its intricate formula a silent, waiting vortex. There were no further instructions, no incantations to be read. The scroll was not a manual, it was a key, their own life force was the hand that would turn it. Naruto, Rias, and Nami stood around it, forming a perfect triangle. The gravity of the moment was a physical weight, pressing the air from their lungs. This was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled decision of a battlefield. It was a clear-eyed, deliberate step off a cliff, a leap of faith into an unknown that promised power at the cost of their very selves. "Ready?" Naruto asked, his voice quiet, betraying none of the storm of fear and hope raging within him. He looked at each of them, giving them one last chance to turn back. Nami met his gaze, her brown eyes clear and resolute. She thought of her crew, a pang of loss echoing in her heart. But then she thought of the empty-eyed villagers of Shijima, and her resolve hardened into steel. She would not let another home fall to a tyrant. She gave a sharp, determined nod. Rias looked from the scroll to Naruto. The pride of the Grimoire clan warred with the newfound loyalty she felt for these strange, infuriating, and undeniably powerful humans. To weave her noble, demonic lineage with theirs was heresy. And yet, to stand beside them felt more right, more true, than any duty she had ever known. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "Let's begin." Following an instinct they all seemed to share, they knelt. Each placed a hand on the scroll, their fingers overlapping at the nexus of the central spiral. Naruto on top, the anchor, Rias and Nami beneath, the currents. Naruto took a deep breath and began to push his chakra into the scroll. It was not the overwhelming flood of power he used in battle, but a steady, controlled stream, an offering. The scroll flared to life, the crimson characters glowing with the intensity of a forge. Rias and Nami flinched as the energy touched them, but then, guided by some unseen instruction, they too began to release their own power. Rias's demonic energy, a torrent of crimson and black, flowed into the mix. Nami, who had no such internal reservoir, instead offered something more fundamental. Her will, her connection to the natural world, the keen, electric spark of her own life force. The world dissolved. It was not a gentle fading. It was a violent, wrenching deconstruction. The stone floor, the wooden walls, the flickering candlelight, it all unraveled into shimmering, constituent threads of light. Golden threads of chakra, crimson threads of demonic power, and silvery white threads of pure, untamed life force. They were pulled from their bodies, their consciousnesses stretched thin, and then woven together with excruciating intimacy. They felt a dizzying, terrifying vertigo as the very concept of "I" began to blur at the edges, bleeding into "we." Then, the chaos resolved. They were standing in a new place. A shared mindscape. Their soul space. It was a vast, featureless gray expanse under a perpetually twilight sky. It was not empty, however. Before them stood 3 doors, each glowing with a faint, personal light. One a vibrant, sun orange. One a deep, blood crimson. One a bright, sky blue. They didn't need to speak. They knew, with a shared certainty, what they had to do. To forge the pact, they had to walk through each other's doors. They had to see the foundations of the souls they were binding themselves to. Naruto, as the anchor, went first. He reached out and pushed open the orange door. The gray expanse vanished, replaced by the familiar sights of Konoha. But it was a Konoha seen through a child's eyes, a world of towering adults and suspicious, hateful glares. Rias and Nami stood beside him, not as observers, but as participants. Feeling the sharp, stinging loneliness of a young boy on a swing, watching other children play with their families. They felt his hunger, his desperate need for acknowledgement, the crushing weight of a village's scorn. Then, the world shifted. They were in a dark, cavernous space, standing before a set of colossal bars. Behind them, a monstrous, 9-tailed fox of pure, malevolent chakra roared. Its voice a symphony of hatred and rage. Rias instinctively raised a hand, a shield of destructive energy forming, while Nami stumbled back, her mind screaming at the sight of a creature that could swallow the Grand Line whole. But Naruto was unafraid. He walked forward, and as he did, the vision changed. The rage in the fox's eyes softened to a grudging respect. The cage dissolved. They saw Naruto and the fox, Kurama, sitting not as prisoner and warden, but as partners, bumping fists in a silent, profound understanding. Rias and Nami felt it then, Naruto's greatest strength. Not the power of the beast, but the power to look upon a creature of pure hatred and see a friend. The final vision was the most painful. They stood with him on a battlefield, surrounded by the faces of those he had lost. The wise, perverted grin of Jiraiya. The gentle, loving smiles of his parents. The final, determined gaze of Neji. They felt his grief, a chasm in his soul that never truly healed. And they understood the immense burden he carried. He wasn't just the hero, he was the survivor, the one left to carry the weight of all their dreams. The vision faded, and they were back in the gray twilight. The orange door slowly closing behind them. Rias and Nami looked at Naruto, their eyes wide with a new, shattering depth of understanding. The goofy, impossibly powerful leader was gone. In his place stood a man forged in the fires of the deepest loneliness and the most profound love. Next, Rias opened the crimson door. They were immediately assaulted by the opulent, stifling atmosphere of a grand ballroom. Devils in exquisite attire danced and whispered, their conversations a web of political intrigue and ancient rivalries. Rias was at the center of it all, a beautiful doll in a perfect dress. Her smile a carefully constructed mask. They felt the crushing pressure of her family name, the Grimoire crest a brand on her very soul. They experienced the endless lessons, the political maneuvering, the weight of 1,000 years of expectation. The scene shifted. They saw her with her peerage, her family. Akeno, Kiba, Kaneko. But even here, they felt her slight distance. She was their king, their master. She loved them, but she could never truly be their equal. It was a loneliness of a different kind, the isolation of command. Then, they saw her dream. A simple life, away from the politics and the pressure. A world where she was just Rias, free to choose her own path, to love whom she chose, to be defined not by her blood, but by her heart. They felt her fierce, desperate desire for a freedom she had never known, and they understood that her aristocratic pride was a suit of armor, protecting a vulnerable heart that longed for connection. When the crimson door closed, Naruto and Nami saw her not as a devil princess, but as a caged bird with wings of fire, dreaming of the open sky. Finally, Nami opened the blue door. The scent of salt and tangerine filled the air. They were in Kokoyasi village. But it was not the cheerful home she spoke of. It was a place of fear, ruled by the cruel, saw-nosed fishman, Arlong. They felt the cold, hard steel of the tattoo needle as it etched his hated symbol onto her skin. They felt the bone-deep weariness of a child trying to buy a village's freedom, one stolen berry at a time, the hope a flickering candle in a hurricane of despair. They stood beside her as she watched her mother, Belmere, murdered for the sake of 2 adopted daughters. The raw, primal agony of a child's loss ripped through them. A grief so profound it stole the breath from their lungs. They understood, in that moment, the root of her fear of being helpless, of being too weak to protect the ones she loved. It was the source of her obsessive need for money, for strength, for control. But then, the darkness was pierced by a brilliant, defiant light. They saw a straw-hatted boy stretch his rubber arm and shatter Arlong Park. They stood with Nami as Luffy placed his treasured hat on her head and screamed to the world that she was his friend. They felt her shock, her disbelief, and then the overwhelming, soul-shaking relief of being saved. They saw flashes of her life with the Straw Hats, laughing with Usopp, bickering with Sanji, navigating through impossible storms, her crew placing their lives in her hands with absolute, unconditional trust. They understood that Nami's strength wasn't just her brilliant mind, it was the fierce, unshakable loyalty she held for the family she had chosen. The blue door closed. They stood in the gray twilight. No longer 3 individuals, but 3 open books, their deepest truths laid bare. The last vestiges of mistrust and misunderstanding had been burned away, replaced by a raw, powerful empathy. And that was when the enemy appeared. From the gray floor, a 4th figure coalesced. It had no face, only a smooth, placid surface. It was a being of pure apathy, a manifestation of the Silent King's will. Drawn to the chaotic, vibrant energy of their merging souls. "It is all so pointless," a voice whispered, not in their ears, but in the center of their minds. It was a voice of utter despair. Your struggles, your pain, it is the flaw in creation. A discordant note in the grand, silent symphony. The entity reached out, and their own fears, now shared, turned against them. You are alone, Naruto, it whispered, showing him an image of Rias and Nami fading away, leaving him once more on the lonely swing. Your bonds are an illusion. They will always leave you. You are a failure, Rias, it hissed, showing her the scornful faces of the 72 pillars. You have diluted your noble blood with mortals. You have disgraced your name for a fleeting feeling. You are weak, Nami, it taunted, showing her the thousand sunny sinking beneath the waves, her friends calling her name as she failed to save them. Your mind is a fragile thing. In the face of true power, you are nothing. The assault was brutal, an attack on the very foundations of their being. But the herald had made the same mistake twice. It thought their pain was their weakness. It was Naruto who first found his voice. He looked at the vision of his loneliness and smiled, a sad, knowing expression. I was alone, he said, his voice ringing with a new clarity in the soul space. And because of that, I know the value of not being alone. My past isn't my cage. It's my reason to fight for them. The vision of the swing dissolved. Rias looked at the sneering faces of her ancestors. My name is a burden, she admitted, her voice firm. But it is my burden to shape. My strength isn't just in my blood, it's in my choices. And I choose them. The phantoms of the underworld vanished. Nami faced the image of her sinking ship, tears welling in her eyes. But she did not falter. I was weak, she said, her voice trembling but unbroken. I was helpless, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure I am never, ever helpless again. My friends gave me strength, and I will use that strength to protect my new friends. The ocean of despair evaporated. They turned as one to face the entity, their hands finding each other's. Our pain isn't a flaw, Naruto declared. Our struggles are our strength, Rias continued. And our bonds are everything. Nami finished. They poured their combined will into a single, unified strike. It was not chakra, or demonic energy, or life force. It was something new, a torrent of incandescent, golden crimson silver energy, a cohesive flame forged from their accepted pasts and their shared future. They called it soulfire. The entity of despair shrieked as the soulfire washed over it, not just destroying it, but filling its emptiness with the sheer, vibrant reality of their emotions. It could not exist in the face of such defiant life. It simply ceased to be. The gray twilight dissolved into a blinding, peaceful white light. They awoke with a shared gasp, back in the Uzumaki shrine. Their hands were still on the scroll, which now lay inert, the ancient characters faded into nothing, its purpose fulfilled. The candlelight had burned low. They were themselves, yet, more. Naruto could feel a cool, precise destructive intent coiled within his chakra, a power that could unmake as well as create. Rias felt a warm, vibrant current of life flowing through her demonic power. A wellspring of stamina and vitality that was not her own. Nami felt the very air around her hum, no longer just a collection of atmospheric data, but a living medium she could almost speak to, INF. Used with both Naruto's chakra and Rias's energy, they could feel each other. Not just their physical presence, but the quiet hum of their thoughts, the echo of their emotions. It wasn't an invasion of privacy, but a comforting, constant awareness. A whisper of Nami's sharp analytical mind, a current of Rias's fierce pride, a foundation of Naruto's unshakable hope. They slowly pulled their hands away and rose to their feet. The silence of the shrine filled with a new, profound understanding. They had walked through the fire of each other's souls and had come out the other side, no longer three separate strands, but a single, unbreakable cord. Their old selves were gone. In their place stood a new family, a new power, a new hope for a world drowning in silence. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Unraveling World. The change was immediate and palpable. When they walked out of the Uzumaki shrine and into the Konoha morning, the world felt louder, more vibrant. Naruto could feel the life force of the village not just as an abstract sea of energy, but as individual, distinct sparks. Every villager, every blade of grass, every scurrying insect. It was almost overwhelming, a symphony where he had once only heard a single note. Beside him, Rias moved with a new, subtle grace. Her crimson aura was no longer a barely leashed torrent of power. It was a calm, steady flame that seemed to draw strength from the very air she breathed. Nami's eyes, always sharp, now held a deeper, more profound awareness. She glanced at a cloud, and Naruto could almost feel her thinking, her mind tracing the flows of atmospheric pressure and moisture. But now with an instinctive understanding of the chakra that bound them. They didn't need to speak of their new abilities. They were simply there. An intuitive, knowledge that had been woven into their very being. They spent the next few days in a secluded training ground, not to learn, but to explore the new reality of their existence. The first discovery was explosive. Naruto, wanting to test a theory, formed a Rasengan. But as he poured his chakra into the swirling sphere, he instinctively reached for the cool, precise feeling of Rias's power that now resided within him. The blue sphere of chakra turned a violent, churning violet. It no longer just ground away at its target, it seemed to erase it from existence. When he unleashed the Rasengan of ruin on a massive boulder, the rock didn't shatter, it simply vanished, leaving behind not even dust. Rias, in turn, found that her power of destruction was no longer a purely draining, high-cost ability. By drawing on the vast, life-giving well of Naruto's chakra, she could maintain her attacks for longer, shaping them with greater control. She created a delicate, intricate bird of pure destructive energy that flew a full circle around the training ground before dissolving, an act of fine control that would have been impossible for her before. But it was Nami who underwent the most dramatic transformation. She was the conductor of their symphony. Standing in the center of the field, she held her klima tacked aloft. She focused, drawing on the wellspring of their shared power. The sky, once a clear, placid blue, became her canvas. She didn't just create a storm cloud, she wove a tempest. She pulled Naruto's wind-natured chakra to create cyclonic winds, then infused them with Rias's energy, creating an eerie, blood-red lightning that struck with pinpoint, destructive accuracy. She had become a force of nature, a true weather witch whose power was now limited only by her imagination. "This is," Shikamaru said from the sidelines, where he and Kakashi were observing. He took a long drag from his cigarette, the smoke unable to hide the look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face. "Troublesome doesn't even begin to cover it." Kakashi's single eye was wide. "They're not just combining their powers. They're creating something new, a force that operates outside the known elemental affinities. This could change everything." Their exploration was cut short by a frantic summons. A red alert, a state of emergency. In the Hokage's command center, the central map of the elemental nations was lit with a horrifying, spreading stain of red. From the east, a massive, continent-spanning wave of the blight was rolling in. It moved faster than any army, a tidal wave of life-draining energy that was consuming everything in its path. Entire forests vanished in minutes. Towns and villages went dark on the sensor network, their inhabitants, life signatures simply winking out. "He knows," Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The Silent King. He felt the pact. This is his response. The timing was no coincidence. It was a direct, overwhelming counterattack. A show of force meant to crush their newfound hope before it could fully ignite. "The other cage are demanding a summit," Shikamaru reported, his voice tight with urgency. "The blight is pouring over their borders. They're in a panic. Darui is already en route. The Tsuchikage and Mizukage are joining via our new long-range communication network." The emergency cage summit was a chaotic affair. The faces of the other leaders, projected in shimmering blue light within the council chambers, were masks of fear and anger. Darui, the Raikage, arrived in person via his fastest body flicker technique, his presence filling the room with an aura of thunderous impatience. "Naruto, this has gone on long enough." Darui boomed, his hand slamming down on the council table. "This plague started in your lands, and its acceleration coincides directly with the arrival of your guests. The other nations are suffering for Konoha's recklessness. They are not the cause, Darui, they are the answer." Naruto shot back, his own authority flaring. But his words were lost in a chorus of doubt. From a separate, smaller projector, a new voice cut in, cold and authoritative. It was the warden of the Nexus Guard. "Leaders of the elemental nations." The warden's placid voice echoed, an unwelcome specter at their war council. I warned the Hokage. This chaotic fusion of realities is a beacon. A dinner bell for entities like the Silent King. By trying to save their world, they have endangered it further. They have upset the fundamental balance. The warden's words were a poison dart of fear and misinformation. The seeds of doubt he had planted began to sprout in the fertile ground of the cage's terror. He's right, the Tsuchikage, Kuretsuchi, said, her projected image flickering with agitation. Naruto, we respect you. But you have acted alone. You have brought forces into our world that we do not understand, and now we are all paying the price. We believe the only solution is to sever this connection. Your allies must be sealed, contained, until we can find a way to send them back. A wave of assent rippled through the other leaders. It was a political betrayal of the highest order, born not of malice, but of pure, unadulterated fear. They were willing to sacrifice Naruto's solution for a chance to appease the god at their door. Rias and Nami, who had been standing silently behind Naruto, stepped forward. The pressure in the room from the assembled cage was immense, but they did not flinch. Naruto held up a hand, stopping them. He turned to face the projected images in the wreckage beside him. His earlier anger was gone, replaced by a profound, sorrowful calm. He was no longer just a cage arguing with his peers. He was the pillar of his entire world, and he would not let it crumble. You're all afraid, he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. I understand that. You see a monster you can't fight, so you look for someone to blame. You look for a sacrifice to make. You think that if you get rid of them, he gestured to Rias and Nami, the Silent King will lose interest. That he'll be satisfied. You are wrong. He took a step forward, his blue eyes burning within intensity that made even the wreckage take an involuntary step back. The king doesn't just want power. He wants silence. He wants an end to struggle, to choice, to life itself. Giving him what he wants won't save you. It will just make you easier to consume. I did not bring them here to be weapons for Konoha. I brought them here to be champions for this world. Our world. He looked at each of them, his gaze lingering on Darui. You talk of balance. The only balance that matters now is the one between survival and annihilation. You can stand behind me, or you can be erased. There is no third option. His charisma, his absolute, unwavering emotional clarity, was a physical force. It cut through their fear, shaming their paranoia. But before his words could fully settle, the world shook. The roof of the cage summit chamber exploded inward. From the smoke and debris, a new figure descended. It was not the silent, shambling Blight Walker. This was a herald of a higher order. It was clad in armor of polished, obsidian-like stone. And it wielded a greatsword that seemed to be forged from pure, solidified silence. Where the village priest had been a whisper, this herald was a proclamation. The age of noise is over. The herald boomed, its voice the grating sound of stone on stone. The master offers you the gift of peace. Surrender your chaotic energies, and you will be spared the pain of being unmade. The cage, the most powerful shinobi in the world, were frozen for a heart-stopping second. This creature's power was on a level they hadn't felt since the war. It dwarfed their own, but Naruto's new family did not freeze. They moved as one. Nami acted first. She didn't attack. She swung her claim attacked, creating a thick, disorienting fog laced with mirages inside the confined space of the council chamber. The herald, for all its power, was momentarily blinded. In that split second, Rias lunged. She didn't unleash a massive blast. Instead, she drew on her newfound control, her hands glowing with a focused, contained destructive energy. She didn't aim for the herald, but for the greatsword it wielded. Her hands closed around the blade. The sword of silence began to crackle and disintegrate, its essence being unmade at a molecular level. The herald roared in fury, shaking her off. But the distraction had served its purpose. Naruto appeared above it, descending like a golden meteor. In his hands was a new technique, a terrifyingly beautiful fusion of all three of their powers. A Rasenshuriken, but its blades were not made of wind. They were forged from the crimson-black energy of destruction. And at its core, a storm of Nami's lightning raged. Sage art. Maelstrom of ruin. The attack struck the herald dead center. There was no grand explosion. There was a moment of absolute silence. And then the herald, its obsidian armor, its immense power, simply imploded. It was erased from reality, leaving behind nothing but a faint, tingling vacuum in the air. The Trio landed gracefully in the center of the ruined chamber, standing back to back amidst the stunned silence of the world's most powerful leaders. They hadn't just defeated the threat. They had annihilated it with a casual, coordinated grace that was more terrifying than any display of brute force. Darui stared, his mouth agape, at the spot where the herald had been. Kuretsuchi's projected image was pale with shock. The warden of the Nexus Guard had vanished, his gambit to divide them having failed spectacularly. Naruto turned to the stunned cage, his golden chakra mode receding. "The Silent King is coming," he said, his voice ringing with the undeniable truth of their victory. "Are you with us, or are you in our way?" Shikamaru, leaning against a half-destroyed wall, allowed himself a small, tired smile. Darui, the Raikage, was the first to find his voice. He looked from Naruto to Rias nami, his eyes filled with a new, profound respect. He walked forward and offered his hand to Naruto. "Forgive our fear, Hokage," he said. His voice humbled. "You were right. Lead the way. Kumogakure will follow." One by one, the other Kage voiced their assent. The political threat had been shattered. The allied shinobi forces were reborn, not out of a shared history of conflict, but out of a shared hope for survival. And at its heart stood a devil, a pirate, and a ninja, a trinity of impossible power. Ready to face the unraveling world. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Battle for the Land of Fire. War was a rhythm Naruto knew in his bones. The frantic energy of the command center, the scent of ink and ozone, the constant murmuring hum of the sensor core tracking enemy movements. It was a grim, familiar symphony. But this war was different. The enemy wasn't an army of shinobi with tactics he could predict. It was a tide, a silent, inexorable flood of nothingness that devoured the land and left a sterile gray desert in its wake. The allied shinobi forces had mobilized with a speed born of sheer terror. Tens of thousands of shinobi from all 5 great nations and the Land of Iron stood ready, a multicolored sea of flak jackets and determined faces arrayed across the plains of the Land of Fire. They had formed a massive defensive line, a living wall of chakra and steel against the encroaching blight. At the center of it all, in a command tent bustling with strategists and messengers, stood Naruto. He was not the frontline soldier he had once been. He was the commander, the linchpin. A massive, 3-dimensional map of the battlefield, created by the Yamanaka clan's sensory techniques, floated in the center of the tent. On it, the encroaching red of the blight pushed relentlessly against their blue line of defense. "The eastern flank is holding, but the blight's density is increasing," Shikamaru reported. His voice a low, steady counterpoint to the controlled chaos. "It's eroding their chakra reserves at an alarming rate. They can't keep their larger-scale Earth-style walls up for much longer." Nami stood beside him, her eyes closed. She wasn't looking at the map. She was feeling it. "The atmospheric pressure in that quadrant is dropping," she said, her voice distant. "The air is becoming inert. It's not just draining chakra, it's draining the kinetic energy out of the environment. Tell the 3rd Division to fall back in a staggered retreat. Have the wind style us. Create a series of vacuum blades behind them. It won't stop the blight, but it will slow the advance by creating a buffer of dead air." A sensor nin, his face pale, relayed the order instantly. Shikamaru looked at Nami, a flicker of awe in his tired eyes. While he was playing shogi, she was playing with the board itself. Rias was not in the command tent. She was on the front lines, a crimson comet of destruction. She stood atop a hastily erected earth wall, her long red hair a defiant banner against the gray tide. Below her, the blight was not just a mist, it was spawning creatures. Misha, pen horrors of twisted wood and crumbling stone, animated by a sliver of the Silent King's will. She raised her hands, and a wave of pure destructive energy, tempered with Naruto's life force for stability, washed over the field. Dozens of the blight spawn simply ceased to exist. She was a one-woman army, a living god of destruction holding back the apocalypse. But for every one she erased, 2 more reclawed their way from the dying earth. Even amidst the chaos of war, there were moments of quiet humanity. Hinata Hyuga, now the head of her clan and a formidable Jonin, appeared beside Rias, her Byakugan active. She unleashed a gentle fist barrage, striking the chakra points of a creature that had slipped past Rias's assault, causing it to implode. "Your control is remarkable, Lady Grimori," Hinata said, her voice calm and steady amidst the cacophony. "You wield such immense power, yet you seem at peace." Rias glanced at her, a flicker of surprise on her face. "Peace is not a word I would have ever associated with my power," she admitted, obliterating another wave of creatures. "But now, it does not feel like I am unleashing a storm. It feels like I am calming one." In the shared soul space, she could feel Naruto's steadying presence, a quiet anchor in the hurricane of her own power. She felt Hinata's admiration, and a strange, unfamiliar warmth bloomed in her chest. A kinship. Back in the command tent, Naruto was directing the flow of battle with a clarity that amazed even Kakashi. He wasn't just giving orders, he was connecting with his forces. He sent a clone to the medical tents, its hands glowing with healing energy, stabilizing the shinobi who had been drained by the blight. He sent another to the front lines, creating a massive-tailed beast ball Rasenshuriken that carved a mile-long trench in the ground, a firebreak of raw power that bought them precious minutes. He was everywhere at once, his will the unifying force of the entire army. But the true strength of their new pact was in their silent, instantaneous communication. "Nami," Naruto sent the thought, a silent whisper in her mind. "The blight is adapting. It's starting to absorb the ninjutsu we throw at it." Nami's eyes snapped open. "I feel it. The energy isn't being nullified, it's being integrated. It's learning." She turned to Shikamaru. "All units, cease large-scale elemental ninjutsu. Switch to taijutsu, kenjutsu, and sealing techniques only. It's using our own attacks to grow stronger." The order was relayed. The nature of the battle shifted. The grand, explosive displays of power ceased, replaced by the grim, intimate work of close-quarters combat. Rock Lee became a green hurricane of motion, his fists and feet shattering the blight spawn. Mifune and his samurai moved like a single, flowing river of steel. Their chakra-infused blades cutting down the enemy with silent precision. But the enemy was evolving at a horrifying rate. The blight spawn were no longer just mindless beasts. They began to take on twisted, nightmarish forms that mirrored the fears of the shinobi they fought. A sand nin would find himself facing a creature of choking, grasping sand. A mist nin would be hunted by a monster of suffocating fog. The Silent King wasn't just fighting their army, he was fighting their minds. The true crisis came at dusk. The setting sun cast long, ominous shadows across the ravaged battlefield. And in the center of the enemy line, the blight began to coalesce. It swirled and compacted, drawing in the energy of the entire front, pulling the very life from the land in a massive, visible vortex. It rose from the earth, a monument to despair. It was a creature the size of a mountain, a vaguely humanoid figure with a featureless face, its body a constantly shifting mass of all the ninjutsu it had absorbed. It crackled with stolen lightning, burned with stolen fire, and wept a river of stolen water. At its core was a heart of pure, silent darkness. It was a god made from their own stolen power. A blight titan. Its presence on the battlefield was a death sentence. The morale of the allied shinobi forces, already frayed, began to shatter. Its first act was to raise a colossal hand and bring it down upon the central defensive wall, which crumpled like paper, burying hundreds of shinobi in an instant. In the command tent, every strategist went silent. The floating map flickered and died in that sector. They were blind. They were broken. Naruto, Rias, and Nami locked eyes. No words were needed. The time for strategy was over. The time for a miracle had come. Naruto vanished in a golden flash. Rias was enveloped in a pillar of crimson light and shot across the battlefield. Nami closed her eyes and began to draw upon the storm of their shared soul, her hair whipping around her as an impossible amount of atmospheric energy gathered above the battlefield. The three of them converged in the sky directly in front of the Blight Titan. For the first time, the allied forces saw their three leaders united. A trinity of impossible power against a god of stolen dreams. "It's a living battery," Nami's thought echoed between them, sharp and clear. "We can't destroy it with a single attack. We have to drain it. Overload it. A distraction is needed," Rias added, her voice a calm, cold fury. "Something it cannot ignore." "Leave that to me," Naruto replied, his will a bedrock of certainty. He entered his six-paths sage mode, a golden cloak of chakra erupting around him as 9 truth-seeking orbs manifested behind his back. He swelled in size, Kurama's chakra forming a massive, spectral avatar of the 9-tailed fox around him. But this was different. Infused with Rias's power, the avatar was edged in a destructive crimson light. "Hey!" the avatar roared, its voice the combined sound of a man and a demon. "You want a meal? Try choking on this." The Kurama avatar charged, a golden mountain of life and fury colliding with the titan of stolen despair. The impact sent a shockwave that flattened everything for miles. Naruto was buying them time, a desperate, brutal wrestling match with a god. While the titan was occupied, Rias flew above it, her hands held high. She gathered her power, not into a blast, but into a sphere, a miniature sun of pure, unmaking energy, stabilized by the life force flowing into her from Naruto. It was the most powerful attack she had ever conceived. At the same time, Nami finished her own preparations. The sky above had turned a churning, unnatural black. From the clouds, it didn't just rain. It began to snow, but it was not frozen water. It was a blizzard of tiny, shimmering needles of pure, condensed chakra, drawn from the atmosphere itself. A chakra hail that was harmless to the shinobi, who could simply absorb it, but was a torrent of raw, chaotic energy to the titan. The hail began to fall, blanketing the battlefield. The titan, locked in combat with Naruto, began to absorb the storm, its body swelling, unable to process the sheer volume of uncontrolled energy. It was like force-feeding a starving man until his stomach burst. Now, Rias, Nami and Naruto thought as one. From her position high above, Rias let her attack fall. It was not an explosion. It was a needle point of absolute annihilation. The sun of extinction descended and pierced the titan's core. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The overcharged, unstable heart of the titan, struck by an energy that unmade reality, collapsed in on itself. A wave of silent, white light expanded outwards. It didn't destroy, it reset. The stolen ninjutsu within the titan was released. But it was inert, neutralized. The stolen life force was freed, washing back over the land in a wave of healing green energy. The bodies of the fallen shinobi were not revived, but the dying earth drank in the returned life, and for a moment, flowers bloomed on the scarred battlefield. The blight titan was gone. The encroaching red on the map vanished, pushed back to the very edges of the continent. They had won the battle. Naruto, Rias, and Nami descended, their enhanced modes receding, leaving them exhausted but standing. They landed in the center of the battlefield, the stunned, silent shinobi staring at them with expressions of utter, reverent awe. But the victory felt incomplete. It had been a costly, desperate defense. As they looked towards the eastern horizon, they could feel it. The cold, patient, watching presence of the silent king in his distant realm. They had destroyed his army. They had broken his great siege. But they knew, with a certainty that chilled them to the bone, that all they had truly done was get his full, undivided attention. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Nexus Guard's Gambit. Victory was a fragile, fleeting thing. In the days following the defeat of the Blight Titan, a wave of exhausted relief washed over the allied shinobi forces. The Blight had receded to the continent's edge, a simmering, malevolent line on the horizon, held in check but not defeated. There were funerals to attend, defenses to rebuild, and a cautious, weary celebration of life reclaimed. But for Naruto, Rias, and Nami, there was no relief. The silence from their enemy was more terrifying than any assault. They could feel the silent king's attention now, a cold, focused pressure on their shared soul. It was the calm before the storm, the deep, indrawn breath of a god preparing to exhale annihilation. They stood on the Hokage monument, looking down at the bustling, recovering village. The bond between them was a constant, comforting thrum beneath the surface of their thoughts. They could feel each other's anxieties without a word. Nami's sharp, analytical worry about the king's next move, Rias's proud, defiant anger at the violation of their world, and Naruto's deep, foundational fear of failing the people who trusted him. "He's learning," Naruto said, his voice quiet. "He threw an army at us, and we beat it. He threw a monster at us, and we beat that, too. He won't make the same mistake a third time." The next attack won't be physical, Nami agreed, her arms crossed as she scanned the horizon. Or at least, not just physical. He's seen what we can do together. His goal won't be to overpower us. It will be to break us apart. As the words left her mouth, the world stopped. It wasn't a gradual slowing. It was an instantaneous cessation of all things. A shinobi leaping between rooftops froze midair. A leaf falling from a tree hung suspended. The cheerful chatter of the village below was cut off into an absolute, profound silence that was deeper and more fundamental than even the blight. Time itself had been put on pause. The three of them were the only points of motion in a frozen diorama. What is this? Rias breathed, her crimson energy flaring instinctively, a lone flicker of defiance in a static world. This, a calm, familiar voice said from behind them, is a correction. The warden of the Nexus Guard stood there, his simple gray robes untouched by the impossible stillness. He was not alone. Beside him stood another figure, a woman whose presence made the warden seem like a mere acolyte. She was tall and ageless, with hair like spun moonlight and eyes that held the cold, ancient light of distant galaxies. She was not a being of power, she was a law of physics given form. The arbiter of the Nexus. Naruto Uzumaki. Rias Grimori. Nami. The arbiter said, her voice not echoing but simply existing in their minds. Your existence as a triune soul is a paradox the multiverse cannot sustain. It is a wound that draws predators. We have seen this before. In 1,000 different realities, such beautiful, chaotic fusions have been the catalyst for the unmaking of all things. We are this world's only hope, Naruto countered, stepping forward, his own power pushing back against the oppressive stillness. You are its most beautiful poison, the arbiter replied, her galactic eyes holding no malice, only a terrible, weary certainty. We are not your enemies. We are the surgeons who must remove the cancer before it consumes the body of reality. We are here to offer you a choice. A mercy. Disentangle your souls. We have the power to sever the pact, painlessly. We can return the devil and the navigator to their home realities, their memories of this place a fading dream. This world will fall to the Silent King. It is a tragedy, but the alternative is the potential collapse of 1,000 other worlds that your bond will inevitably endanger. The offer was a cold, logical blade to the heart. Save yourselves, save your old lives. At the cost of this one. It was a temptation and a death sentence in one. Never, Rias snarled. We will not abandon them. Our answer is no, Nami said, her hand gripping her klima tact. A useless gesture in this frozen reality, but a necessary act of defiance. The arbiter's expression did not change. It was not a face capable of disappointment. We did not expect your consent. We only offered it as a courtesy. The correction will now proceed by force. She raised a hand, and the world dissolved. The frozen village, the sky, the very ground beneath their feet unraveled into a sea of white. Formless light. They were no longer in their world. They were in the guard's operating theater. A pocket dimension, a blank slate where reality was a suggestion, not a rule. The bond is a psychic construct, the arbiter's voice explained from the featureless white void. To break it, we must first break the will that sustains it. Let us begin. The white world snapped into focus. They were back on the battlefield, moments before the Blight Titan formed. The sky was dark, the air thick with despair. No, Naruto breathed, recognizing the scene. A genjutsu. Worse. Nami's thought flashed between them. A temporal loop. A memory made real. The Titan rose from the earth, a god of stolen power. And they fought it. They executed their plan perfectly. Naruto's Kurama avatar. Rias's son of extinction, Nami's chakra hail. But this time, when Rias's attack struck the core, the Titan didn't implode. It absorbed her attack, its featureless face turning towards her, and unleashed her own power of destruction in a wave that consumed her instantly. Naruto screamed her name. The world flashed white. They were back on the battlefield, moments before the Titan formed. What was that? Rias gasped, the phantom sensation of being unmade still clinging to her. It's showing us failure, Naruto realized. Trying to plant doubt. They fought again. This time, they tried to protect Rias. Naruto took the full force of the Titan's counterattack. The golden avatar shattered, and he was consumed. White flash. Back to the beginning. They tried a different strategy. Nami tried to overload it faster. creating a more powerful storm. The Titan turned its attention to her, draining the life from her in an instant. White flash. Beginning. Again and again, they were forced to relive their greatest victory. Twisted into their most profound failure. Each loop ended with one of them dying, the other two forced to watch, helpless. It was a meticulous, psychological tort. You were designed to erode their trust in the very teamwork that made them strong. After the 10th loop, Nami was on her knees, shaking. After the 20th, Rias's hands were trembling. After the 30th, even Naruto's unshakable will began to fray. The despair was a grinding stone, wearing them down. It's pointless, Rias whispered, her voice cracking during the brief respite between loops. We can't win. That's what they want us to think, Naruto grunted, forcing himself to his feet. But they're missing something. What? Nami asked, her voice hollow. Naruto looked at them, his eyes finding theirs in the pre-battle gloom. They're replaying the memory, he said. But they can't replicate the one thing that made it work. The one thing they don't understand. He didn't say the word. He didn't have to. The bond. The soulfire. The next loop began. The Titan rose. But this time, instead of attacking, they stood their ground. They closed their eyes and reached inward, not for their power, but for each other. They focused on the constant, comforting hum of their shared soul, the anchor in this sea of despair. The Arbiter's voice echoed through the void. Your resistance is illogical. You have seen every possible outcome. You cannot succeed. You're wrong. Naruto called out to the empty sky. You only see the moves. You don't see the players. They let the Titan lumber towards them. And together, they unleashed the pure, unfiltered essence of their bond. It was not an attack. It was a declaration. A wave of golden crimson silver light, the soulfire, erupted from them. It wasn't destructive. It was creative. Where it touched the manufactured memory, grass sprouted. The gray, dead earth bloomed with impossible color. The illusionary Titan, a creature of despair, could not exist in the face of such defiant, unified life. It dissolved into a shower of light. The temporal loop shattered. They were back in the white void. The Arbiter and the Warden stood before them. For the first time, a flicker of something, surprise, curiosity, crossed the Arbiter's cosmic features. Remarkable, she stated. Your bond is more resilient than our projections accounted for. But you have only proven that your will is strong. You have not addressed the fundamental flaw in your argument. Your connection comes at the cost of what you have lost. The white void shifted again. This time, it split into 3 distinct scenes, trapping each of them in a personal prison of regret. Rias was back in the underworld. Her peerage was there, but they looked at her with the eyes of strangers. Her brother, Sirzex, stood before her, his expression one of deep sorrow. You abandoned us, Rias, he said, his voice echoing with her deepest fears. For a dying world and a human boy. You have no place here anymore. Nami was on the deck of the Thousand Sunny. The entire Straw Hat crew was there, laughing and celebrating. But when she tried to speak to them, they looked right through her. Luffy, her captain, her friend, turned to another orange-haired woman standing at the helm. Thanks for getting us through that storm, navigator, he said with his trademark grin. Nami was a ghost, replaced and forgotten. Naruto was in the Pure Land, standing before his parents. His father, Minato, placed a hand on his shoulder. You did so well, my son, he said gently. You saved the world. You brought peace. Your fight is over. It's time to rest. Let it go. Let us be your family now. It was the one thing he had always wanted, to be with them. We can make this real, the Arbiter's voice offered, a soothing balm of temptation. We will sever the pact, and each of you will return to a reality where you are most happy. No more fighting. No more sacrifice. It is a mercy. Tears streamed down Nami's face. Rias's proud facade crumbled into grief. Naruto looked at the smiling faces of his parents, his heart aching with a lifetime of longing. This was the guard's true gambit. Not to break them with pain, but to seduce them with peace. But the bond held. Even separated, they could feel each other. They felt Nami's heartbreak, Rias's sorrow, Naruto's yearning. And in feeling each other's pain, He found the strength to resist their own. Nami was the first to act. You're not them, she screamed at the Phantom crew. My friends would never forget me. And they would never, ever give up on a friend in need. This isn't home. It's a cage. The illusion of the sunny shattered. Rias wiped her tears, her eyes blazing with renewed fire. My place is not given to me by my name or my family, she declared to the phantoms of the underworld. My place is where I choose to stand. And I stand with them. The grand ballroom of her past dissolved. Naruto looked at his parents, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. I miss you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Every single day. But the best way to honor you isn't to join you. It's to live the life you gave me. And to protect the family I have now. He turned his back on his greatest wish, and the pure land faded away. They stood together once more in the white void. Their psychological prisons lay in ruins around them. The Y had faced the deepest desires of their old lives and had chosen their new one. The arbiter of the Nexus stared at them, and for the first time, her placid expression was replaced by one of profound contemplation. The very foundation of her millennia-old logic had been shaken. We have never encountered a bond of this nature, she admitted, her voice losing its absolute certainty. It does not breed chaos. It seems to create its own order. A new law of reality that we do not have a metric for. Naruto stepped forward, not as a warrior, but as an equal. Your job is to protect the balance. Balance isn't about keeping everything separate. It's about how things connect. We're not a disease. We're the immune system this world created to fight one. The arbiter was silent for a long time. The warden looked at her, awaiting a judgment. Our mandate is clear, she finally said. Your existence remains a threat of the highest magnitude. By all our laws, we should correct it. She paused. However, our laws have also never accounted for a variable such as this. An anomaly of will. Therefore, we will grant you a reprieve. She raised a hand, not to attack, but to decree. You will face the Silent King. You will be this world's champions. If you succeed, and your bond proves to be a stable, constructive force, we will re-evaluate our understanding of the cosmos. But if you fail, if the king consumes you, or if your combined power begins to fray the edges of reality as we fear, we will return. And we will not offer a choice. We will prune this entire branch of reality from existence to ensure the health of the whole. No one will ever know this world, or any of you, ever existed. The threat was absolute, a final, terrifying raising of the stakes. They now had to fight not only for their world, but for their very right to exist in the memory of the universe. The white void dissolved, and they were back on the Hokage monument. No time had passed. The leaf that had been falling was still falling. The shinobi frozen mid-leap completed his jump. The sounds of the village rushed back in. They were alone, but the weight of the arbiter's ultimatum was a cold, heavy presence. They looked at each other. The unspoken truth passing between them. Their next battle would be their last. One way or another. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Heart of Silence. The arbiter's ultimatum was not a weight, it was a lens. It brought their world into sharp, terrifying focus. Every laugh from the village below, every rustle of leaves in the wind, every quiet moment of shared understanding between them was now imbued with a profound, precious fragility. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the right for their world's story to be told at all. There was no time for a grand war council. No time for elaborate strategies. The path forward was singular and absolute. They had to take the fight to the king. How? Shikamaru asked, his voice raw with exhaustion in the pre-dawn war room. The map on the table was clear for now, but it felt like a blank page waiting for a final, tragic chapter. We don't know where he is. We can't just step into another dimension. We can, Naruto said, his gaze distant. He could feel it, a faint, lingering disturbance in the fabric of space where the arbiter had stood. A keyhole. The Nexus Guard didn't just give us an ultimatum. They gave us a door. It was a one-way trip. A final, desperate gamble. The goodbyes were brief, heavy with unspoken words. Kakashi placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder, his single eye conveying a lifetime of trust. Sakura hugged all three of them. Her tears a silent plea for their return. Shikamaru simply nodded. What a drag. When they gathered at the base of the Hokage monument, the stone faces of the past watching over them. Naruto, Rias, and Nami clasped hands, forming a circle. They reached out with their shared soul and touched the anomaly the Arbiter had left behind. Reality twisted, not with the violent tearing of Naruto's initial summoning, but with the cold, silent precision of a scalpel. The world of vibrant greens and blues was sliced away, replaced by an utter, perfect black. They were adrift in the space between worlds. The journey to the Silent King's throne, a pilgrimage through a graveyard of galaxies. They drifted past stars that had forgotten how to burn, their light a fading, ghostly memory. They saw entire solar systems, planets locked in perfect, silent orbits, their surfaces smooth, gray, and utterly lifeless. It was a museum of cosmic death, a testament to the king's horrifying, meticulous work. The silence was an active, malevolent force. It pressed in on them, trying to seep into the cracks of their bond, whispering of the futility of their struggle. Feel that, Naruto. Nami's thought was a sharp, anxious spike in their shared consciousness. The emptiness. It's trying to quiet us. To make us forget each other. It is the ultimate expression of despair, Rias sent back. Her own pride a defiant flame against the cold. He is not just destroying worlds. He is erasing their songs. Then we'll just have to be loud enough for all of them, Naruto replied, his will a warm golden sun in the center of their bond, pushing back against the oppressive void. They traveled for an eternity or an instant. In this place, time had no meaning. Finally, they saw it. A single point of non-light in the distance. The heart of silence. It was not a planet or a star. It was a throne. A single, monolithic throne carved from a material that absorbed all light, floating in the dead center of a silent nebula. And seated upon it was the Silent King. He was not a monster. He was a figure of tragic, cosmic regality. He was humanoid in form, his body seemingly forged from polished obsidian, reflecting the ghostlight of dead stars. He wore no crown, for his entire being was a symbol of absolute monarchy over oblivion. His face was a smooth, featureless plane, but as they drew closer, two eyes opened, and within them, they saw the captured, dying light of a billion galaxies. Around the throne, shimmering, ethereal echoes of another universe flickered like heat haze. They saw alien cities of crystal and light, creatures of impossible beauty, a world teeming with vibrant, chaotic life. They were the ghosts of his home, the memories of all he had lost. As they approached, the king did not rise. He simply watched them, and his voice entered their minds, not as a whisper, but as the crushing weight of a dead ocean. You have come, the beautiful, chaotic notes that disrupt my symphony of peace. Your peace is death, Naruto yelled, the sound swallowed by the void. Death is a chaotic, messy end, the king corrected. I offer completion, an end to the pain of striving, an end to the agony of loss. A vision, unbidden, flooded their minds. They saw his universe, a kaleidoscope of impossible color and sound, a reality far more vibrant and alive than their own. And then they saw the thing that destroyed it. It had no name, only a nature. The screaming chaos, a formless, cancerous entity of pure, unrestrained life, a cosmic tumor that consumed realities not out of malice, but simply because it could not stop growing. It devoured his world, his people, his everything, its only sound a mind-shattering psychic scream of constant, agonizing creation. He alone had survived, shielded by his own nascent power over silence, a witness to the heat death of his everything. They felt his grief, a sorrow so vast it could drown stars. They felt his terror, the absolute horror of a universe dying in a scream. And they understood. He was not a conqueror. He was a surgeon, attempting to save all of existence from the disease of life itself, the seed of the chaos he had witnessed. I will not allow another universe to scream, the king's thought echoed, laced with an eternity of pain. Your bond, this fusion of life and energy, it sings the same song that preceded my end. I will silence you, not as an act of anger, but of mercy. He rose from his throne, and the void around them solidified into a weapon. The battle was one of abstract, fundamental forces. Naruto formed a tailed beast bomb Rasenshuriken, a miniature sun of life and energy, and hurled it at the king. The king did not block it. He simply extended a hand, and the attack unraveled. The chakra bonds dissolved, the destructive winds faded. The spinning energy dissipated into nothing before it even reached him. Rias unleashed a torrent of her power of destruction. It was the ultimate force of unmaking. Bu. T had met its equal in the king's power of absolute nullification. Her crimson energy was erased by his perfect blackness, the two forces annihilating each other in a flash of silent, violent light. Mi tried to manipulate the very fabric of the void, to create a storm of pure energy. But there was no atmosphere to shape, no particles to charge. She was a navigator in a sea with no water. The king attacked, not with force, but with its absence. He pointed a finger at Naruto, and a wave of pure silence washed over him, attempting to sever his connection to the others, to isolate him, to make him alone once more. No, Rias and Nami screamed in their shared soul, pouring their own will into the bond, reinforcing it, shielding Naruto from the encroaching emptiness. They fought with everything they had. They combined their powers, creating blasts of soulfire, the vibrant, chaotic energy of their bond. It was the only thing that seemed to have an effect. Their soulfire was not an energy the king could simply unravel. It was a concept, a statement of existence that defied his philosophy of silence. Where their attacks struck, a flicker of light, of sound, of possibility returned to the void for a brief moment. But he was a god, and they were mortal. His power was as vast as the dead universe he ruled. For every blow they landed, he healed instantly. He was wearing them down, his immense, patient power a grinding stone against their frantic, desperate fire. Their reserves were finite, his was not. Battered and drained, they floated before him, their energy cloaks flickering. They were losing. It's not working, Nami thought, her mind racing, calculating odds that were rapidly approaching zero. We can't overpower him. His grief is an infinite source of power. We're trying to destroy an ocean with a bucket. Then we stop trying to empty it, Naruto's thought replied, a spark of impossible, desperate hope igniting in the darkness. He remembered the herald. He remembered the arbiter. The answer was never force. We have to heal it. It was a mad idea. An act of empathy so profound it bordered on suicide. To try and heal the grief of a god who had lost everything. They stopped attacking. They let their power cloaks recede, floating before the silent king in their simple, mortal forms. The king paused, his featureless face tilting in what might have been curiosity. You surrender. A wise, final choice. No, Naruto said, his voice now clear and strong in the void. We're not here to fight you anymore. They reached out, not with their fists, but with their hearts. They opened the floodgates of their shared soul, and instead of projecting a weapon, they offered a memory, a connection. The soulfire flowed from them, not as a destructive blast, but as a gentle, warm light. It carried no malice. It carried their truth. The king was engulfed in the light, and he saw. He felt the sting of a child's loneliness on a swing in Konoha. He felt the crushing weight of a noble family's name. He felt the agony of watching a mother die for her children. He saw their pain, their loss, their grief. It was a microscopic fraction of his own, an infinitesimal drop compared to his ocean of sorrow. But then he saw what came after. He saw Naruto being acknowledged by Iruka, embraced by his friends. He saw Rias finding a new family in her peerage, and a new freedom with her allies. He saw Nami saved by a boy in a straw hat, finding a crew that would tear the world apart for her. They weren't showing him that his pain was invalid. They were showing him that he was not alone in it. They were showing him that pain was not an end. It was a beginning, a catalyst for connection, a reason to build, not to erase. It is not the same, the king's thought protested, his form flickering as their empathy warred with his despair. Your losses are finite. Mine was everything. Then let us share the burden, Naruto offered. They pushed deeper, offering not just their memories, but their very essence. Their bond, the soulfire, began to flow into him. It was a torrent of life, of hope, of struggle, of laughter, of tears, of everything he had sought to destroy. It was a poison to his philosophy, but a balm to the ancient, wounded soul beneath. The king screamed, a silent, psychic cry of a billion years of pent-up agony being touched by warmth for the first time. The obsidian shell of his body began to crack, not from damage, but like a seed pod breaking open. Blinding, pure white light poured from the cracks. He was not being destroyed. He was being healed. The grief was not being erased. But it was no longer the only thing he was. He remembered not just the screaming end of his universe, but its beautiful, chaotic life. The featureless face split open, revealing the face of the man he had been before his loss. His eyes, no longer holding the light of dead stars, but filled with a profound, sorrowful peace. "Thank you," he whispered, his true voice heard for the first time. It was the sound of a star being born. He did not die. He let go. His power, his divine will that held the blight together, dissipated. The throne crumbled into dust. The ghost-like echoes of his lost world faded, not into nothing, but into peaceful light. The silent king, his purpose fulfilled not by victory but by healing, dissolved into the fundamental energy of the cosmos, finally at peace. Naruto, Rias, and Nami floated in the void, utterly spent, their life force drained to the barest flicker. But they were victorious. They looked out at the space where the king had been. The oppressive blackness was gone. In the distance, a new star, born from a god's final, peaceful breath, began to shine. Across the elemental nations, the last vestiges of the gray blight evaporated like morning mist, leaving behind a world scarred, but alive. A world that would remember its song. Chapter 9 End.